It is the morning of a new century, the air crisp with promise as snow drifts gently over the rooftops of Mino, a small town nestled in Gifu Prefecture. The year is 1900, and a man sits outside a temple, his breath misting in the cold, hands twisting a worn hat between his fingers. His heart beats loud in his chest, drowning out the whispering snowfall, as another cry, raw and urgent, shatters the silence from within. The world seems to pause, holding its breath. Then, breaking through the stillness, the first wails of a newborn child fill the air. A boy has come into this world, his arrival marking not only the dawn of a new life, but the beginning of an extraordinary journey that will one day carry him beyond these quiet hills. Chiune Sugihara steps inside the temple. He removes his shoes, his feet sinking into the ancient wooden floor. The stillness presses in around him, broken only by the rhythmic chants of monks that seem to resonate from the very walls. The scent of incense hangs in the air, thick and sweet, swirling with the faint murmur of a newborn that draws him forward, step by hesitant step. He rounds the corner, heart still pounding, and then he sees her, his wife, Yatsu, pale and exhausted, but glowing with a quiet triumph as she cradles a tiny bundle swathed in white. The boy is small, but his fists flail in the air, a wrinkled brow beneath a tuft of black hair. For a moment, Yoshime's breath catches in his throat, and his hands tremble as they reach forward. He takes the child gingerly, almost afraid to disturb the fragile connection between the world he knows and the new life he now holds. As he gazes down at his son's scrunched face, so full of raw and furious life, something stirs deep within him, a recognition, a bond that transcends words. The infant's mood softens, and in that moment, all the fear and uncertainty that weighed on Yoshime's shoulders seems to melt away. There is a power in that tiny being, a silent promise that brings light to the dim temple halls. He looks to Yatsu, her eyes meeting his with a knowing smile, as though they have just shared the beginning of a secret. This child, born on the first day of a new century, is not just an addition to their family, but a symbol of possibility, of an unfolding future yet unwritten. Holding his son close, Yoshime's grip tightens, and in that embrace, the world outside fails, leaving only a father, his newborn son, and the quiet breath of their new child. His name is Chiune Sugihara. Sugihara grew up under the sweeping skies of Gifu Prefecture. The hills around Mino were a boy's paradise, alive with mystery and boundless adventure, where the landscape was a patchwork of forests, rivers and fields, and where each season unfolded like a scroll of Japanese calligraphy. In spring, the mountains were draped in sakura blossoms, painting the hillsides in pink, and in summer, the forest came alive with the songs of cicadas. It was a place where a young boy could lose himself, racing his brothers along narrow footpaths, leaping across streams, and daring to climb the tallest trees to catch a glimpse of the world beyond. Sugihara was the second of 6 children, with 5 brothers and 1 sister, and their laughter often echoed through the temple grounds where they lived. The Kyosenji temple stood as a constant presence in their lives, its ancient wooden beams whispering secrets of centuries past, mingling with the scents of pine and earth. It was a borrowed home, but to him it was the only home that mattered. Yet, The Sugihara family was never meant to stay in one place for long. His father was a tax official whose work carried the family from town to town, each move like a ripple across the map of Japan. In 1903, the family left the temple and the familiar hills of Mino behind, heading to the Asahi village in Fukui Prefecture. Chiune was only a small boy then, but the shifting landscape and changing towns became a rhythm he would grow used to. New houses, new schools, new friends to be made and left behind. In 1904, the family moved to Mie Prefecture, where the air was thick with the salt of the nearby sea. Then, in 1905, it was to Nakatsu town in Gifu again, nestled in the Enna Mountains. Each move shaped the view of the world. As he roamed the fields or explored the dusty town roads, he absorbed the lessons of the land, the quiet patience of farmers, the resilience of craftsmen, and the ancient stories woven into every shrine and stone. Chiune's formal education began in 1906, when he entered Nakatsu Town Municipal Elementary School. But even there, his time was brief. In 1907, he transferred to Kuana Elementary in Mie Prefecture, only to move once more that same year to Nagoya's Furuwatari Elementary School. With each transition, Sugihara became adept at adjusting to his new surroundings, quickly learning the unspoken rules of the playground and the rhythms of the classroom. He was a bright student, even at a young age. There was a spark that hinted at deeper curiosities, a desire to see beyond the horizon and to understand the world in its fullness. In 1912, he had completed his elementary schooling with the highest honours. It was clear to all that knew him that he was destined for great things, and his father's expectations followed him like a shadow. Yoshimi dreamed of his son becoming a physician, a man of status and respect, but his spirit was drawn in a different direction, one not shaped by his father's ambitions. When the time came to take the entrance exam for medical school, he made his intentions unmistakable. He answered the exam by writing only his name, a quiet rebellion against the life planned for him. Instead, he would walk his own path, entering Waseda University in 1918 to study English. In the bustling heart of Tokyo, far from the hills of his childhood, he immersed himself in language and learning. He joined the Christian Fraternity, a community founded by an American Baptist pastor, where he honed his English and broadened his view of the world. There, amidst discussions of philosophy and faith, he began to see how words could change the view of the world and could bridge divides, how language could unlock secrets of other cultures. In 1919, his path took a fateful turn when he passed the Foreign Ministry Scholarship exam. The following years would take him far beyond the shores of Japan. First to Korea, where he served as second lieutenant in the Japanese Imperial Army. Then to Manchuria. Harbin, a city on the edge of Russian influence, became his new classroom. It was here where he mastered Russian and German, languages that opened doors to new worlds and laid the groundwork for a destiny that even he himself could scarcely imagine. As he walked the streets of Harbin, the boy from Mino, who had once chased fireflies in the twilight, was now a man poised on the brink of history. The streets of Harbin buzzed with the sounds of trade and the hum of intrigue, a place where East and West collided in the turbulence of the early 20th century. It was here, amid shifting loyalties and restless ambitions of Manchukuo, that Sugihara carved out a path for himself navigating the murky waters of diplomacy. Serving in the Manchurian Foreign Office, he found himself at the heart of delicate negotiations with the Soviet Union over the Northern Manchurian Railway, a symbol of both opportunity and contention. The stakes were high and the balance of power fragile. But as the years wore on, the shine of Manchukuo began to tarnish. Sugihara had come to see the complexities of this land, not just through the eyes of a diplomat, but through the faces of its people. The local Chinese were often treated as second-class citizens, subjected to the exploitation and harsh rule under the occupying Japanese forces. It was not just the policies that troubled him, but the quiet, pervasive cruelty that seemed to seep into every corner of life. He saw the suffering, felt the indignation of those who were stripped of their dignity, and watched as families were torn apart by policies that favoured power over humanity. For Sugihara, it became impossible to reconcile his duties as a representative of Japan with the voices of his conscience that spoke louder each day. His time in Manchukuo had opened his eyes not only to the small details of diplomacy, but also to the deep moral questions that lay just beneath the surface of official policy. With every railway meeting, every closed-door negotiation, the unease inside him grew. In 1934, he reached a decision that would mark a turning point in his life. He tendered his resignation from the post of Deputy Foreign Minister in Manchukuo, a resignation that was more than just a career choice. It was a statement of protest. He could no longer stand as a silent witness to the injustices meted out to the local Chinese population. The harsh policies, the mistreatment and the disdain with which the authorities operated ran contrary to the principles that had guided him from his youth. Sugihara's resignation was a courageous act of defiance, a choice to prioritise morality over ambition. It was a decision that carried risks. Walking away from his position meant not only abandoning a promising career, but also challenging the very system that had given him his status. Yet, it was a risk he was willing to take, for he had come to believe that if one does not act upon the call of justice when it is clear, then one's silence becomes complicity. After his resignation, Sugihara and his wife Claudia would go their separate ways, their marriage coming to an end in 1935. He returned to Japan, carrying with him the weight of his experiences, the lesson learned from both diplomacy and the quiet resistance he had mounted. There, he began a new chapter, remarrying and starting a family. But his time in Manchukuo had left an indelible mark, a sense that true diplomacy must always be grounded in the principles of humanity. It is the spring of 1939. The winds of history swept Sugihara to Eastern Europe, where the world seemed poised on a knife edge. The temporary capital of Lithuania, Kaunas, lay nestled between the rising tides of conflict, a city where the streets echoed with the whispers of war and the air was thick with uncertainty. Here, Sugihara took up the post of vice-consul at the Japanese consulate, a role that extended beyond diplomacy, venturing into the shadowy realm of intelligence. His assignment was to monitor the movement of Soviet and German troops, gathering fragments of crucial information that would shape the strategies of Tokyo and Berlin. With every report he sent back, Sugihara's work sought to untangle the delicate threads of espionage tightening around Europe. It was a time when alliances shifted like sand underfoot, and behind every handshake there would lurked an unspoken agenda. Yet, Sugihara was not alone in his endeavours. Quietly he formed a link with Polish intelligence, a partnership born out of the Japanese-Polish cooperative strategy that aimed to counter the growing menace of Soviet power. The collaboration was built on mutual interests, a shared recognition that the changing political landscape required actions shrouded in secrecy. As he moved through Kaunas, Sugihara's keen eyes and steady demeanour allowed him to navigate the murky waters of international intrigue. A world where trust was rare and information was a currency more valuable than gold. But amidst these duties, Sugihara also faced the challenge of a name foreign to the Lithuanian tongue. He began to use Sempo, a Sino-Japanese reading of his given name, and it was simpler for the locals to pronounce than Chiune. It was a small adaptation, a subtle shift that reflected the necessity of blending into his surroundings. For Sugihara, it was more than just a change of name. It was an act of accommodation in a place where so much remained unfamiliar. Kaunas, with its cobblestone streets and centuries-old architecture, was a far cry from the bustling life of Tokyo. Yet, there was a quiet dignity in its people, a resilience that he had seen before in other corners of the world. As the drums of war beat even closer, Sugihara's work would soon shift from the realm of military intelligence to a far greater cause. In the summer of 1940, Lithuania found itself under a new, ominous shadow as the Soviet Union occupied the country, tightening its grip on Eastern Europe. On the streets of Kaunas, uncertainty loomed large for Jewish refugees. There was a desperate need to escape. Fleeing from Nazi-occupied Poland and facing Soviet rule in Lithuania, they found themselves trapped between two threats. Their options dwindling as borders closed and safe havens became scarce. The fear was palpable, and the lines outside the Japanese consulate grew longer each day, with men, women, and children seeking the impossible, a way out. For many, that way out came in the form of a visa to Japan, an unlikely route that would take them far from the impending horrors. But obtaining the necessary documents was no simple task. Countries around the world had shut their doors, and without an official exit visa, even the journey to Japan was perilous. The refugees needed more than just hope. They needed a plan, and time was running out. As the situation grew dire, some began to find a sliver of possibility in the unlikeliest of places, the Dutch colony of Curacao, a tiny Caribbean island thousands of miles away. It was the Jewish Nathan Gutworth, a student and a Dutch national, who first saw a path through. With determination, he approached the Dutch ambassador to the Baltic states, LPJ Dideka, in Riga, Latvia. He requested a pass to Curacao, knowing that an official visa might give him the legal standing he needed to leave Lithuania. Remarkably, the ambassador agreed, issuing a document that conveniently omitted the usual requirement for the permission of the colony's governor. A minor omission would become a lifeline for many. Following Dideka's lead, the Dutch honorary consul Jan Zwartdijk, stationed in Kaunas, began to issue similar passes to other desperate refugees. In a matter of weeks, 2,200 Jews held in their hands what seemed to be their only ticket to freedom. Sugihara saw the stream of humanity flowing into the consulate. Families, students, rabbis and scholars, all clutching their makeshift visas. He knew that without Japanese transit visas to accompany these documents, the Curacao passes were worthless, mere paper promises that would be dismissed at the border. And so, in an act that would defy diplomatic protocol, Sugihara began to issue transit visas to Japan. The Japanese consulate in Kaunas became a lifeline, one that many desperately clung to as they faced an uncertain future. By June that year, Italy's entry into the war had closed the Mediterranean escape route. Refugees had no choice but to seek new ways out, and a path emerged across the vast expanses of Russia via the Trans-Siberian Railway, leading to the port city of Vladivostok, and from there to Japan. It was a journey of unimaginable distance, spanning Europe and Asia, and for those who embarked on it, Japan became not just a transit point, but a symbol of hope, a place that, if reached, might mean the difference between life and death. The Soviet authorities, ever tightening their control, declared on the last day of 1940 that all persons residing in Lithuania as of September could apply for Soviet citizenship. For many, this seemed like a safe option, but not for all. Rabbis, yeshiva students, intellectuals and community leaders saw little opportunity in Soviet promises and chose instead to pursue the uncertain road of emigration. But even with exit permits in hand, the cost of travel remained an unsurmountable obstacle for most. In these desperate times, the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, along with other Jewish organisations, stepped in to provide the necessary funds, enabling around 1,700 refugees to undertake the Trans-Siberian journey to Japan. As the months passed, the waves of refugees began arriving at Japan's ports. Shimonoseki and Kobe, bringing with them stories of loss and survival. Japanese officials at the consulates and at these ports issued thousands of transit visas, and the refugees began to spread across Japan, many congregating in Kobe, where they sought temporary refuge. But for those without valid end visas, the journey did not end there. The war had cut them off from their final destinations, and they found themselves stranded, waiting for the next chapter of their uncertain odyssey to unfold. In the summer of 1940, Sugihara found himself sitting at his cramped desk in the Japanese consulate. His hands, steady yet urgent, moved across the paper, writing out visas at a furious pace. For hours that stretched into days, he worked tirelessly, aware that each slip of paper might mean the difference between life and death. The voices of the refugees, some hushed and trembling, others pleading in desperation, echoed in his mind. He had to act. Orders be damned. Despite the constraints of his post and the strict instructions from the Japanese Foreign Ministry, which repeatedly emphasised that visas could only be issued to those with secure third country passage, Sugihara's resolve did not waver. He knew that most of the refugees fell short of these rigid requirements. Many had nowhere else to run. His heart ached as he weighed the official protocols against the human lives that depended on his ink and his courage. So he continued to write, sometimes for 18, even 20 hours a day, filling page after page with lifelines that offered a glimmer of hope to the terrified faces gathered outside. Day by day, Sugihara's consular office became a scene of controlled chaos, labouring over the seamlessly endless paperwork. Sweat beaded on his brow as he pressed the consular seal again and again, transforming ordinary documents into precious passes to freedom. The stamp thudded onto each visa like a heartbeat, steady, insistent, unstoppable. Thousands of times he filled out the names and dates. Each new visa, not just one life saved, but often entire families spared the horrors that loomed ever closer. The work was grueling. Fatigue clawed at him, his body long past the point of exhaustion, yet he refused to slow. driven by the knowledge that every moment lost was a moment closer to peril for the people lined up outside his window. Even after the consulate officially closed on September 4th, even while packing up the office, Sugihara remained unyielding. Continuing to issue visas, he scribbled signatures in transit from his home, and as the train prepared to pull away from Chiune Station, his hand still moved, reaching out to those desperate souls who pressed towards him. Papers fluttered from the train's window like falling leaves. Some contained nothing more than a signature and a stamp, waiting to be filled in with details that might open the gates to escape. In his final moments at the station, hands trembling from exhaustion, Sugihara managed to write a few last visas before his strength gave out. "Please forgive me," he murmured to the assembled crowd, his voice thick with regret. "I cannot write anymore. I wish you the best." As he bowed deeply, a voice called out from the crowd, "Sugihara, we'll never forget you. I'll surely see you again." And so the train carried him away, leaving behind a stack of papers that bore witness to his defiance, each one a testament to a moment when duty was not to orders but to humanity itself. The exact number of refugees saved by Sugihara's efforts remains a subject of debate, with estimates ranging from around 2,200 to 6,000 people who carried Japanese transit visas issued by the diplomat during that desperate summer of 1940. The higher figure of 6,000, often cited in newspaper reports and historical accounts, likely includes families who travelled together under a single visa, making the actual number of individuals who benefited considerably higher than the number of visas issued. Kei Watanabe argued for the 6,000 figure, suggesting that it was reasonable to estimate about 3 people per visa. Considering that Sugihara's documents typically covered entire families, during that harrowing days in Kaunas, Sugihara's efforts reached far beyond the paperwork. His unauthorised actions provided a narrow path of escape for many who had nowhere else to turn. The visas became known as Sugihara visas, and the sheer volume of those rescued, often referred to in the documentaries and publications, became a testament to his defiance and compassion. By late 1940, Polish refugees began arriving in Japan, landing at ports like Suruga and Kobe. As most refugees with Sugihara visas made their way to Japan, the issue of valid end destination visas loomed large. Many arrived in Kobe, where the local Jewish community and international aid organisations like the Joint Distribution Community and the Polish Embassy worked tirelessly to help them find permanent resettlement. The situation was precarious. In April 1941, over 1,300 Polish Jews in Kobe held transit visas for the Dutch Caribbean colony of Curaçao, or had no valid visas at all, relying on Sugihara's papers or forged documents. Despite the obstacles, a significant number of refugees managed to depart Japan. By the time Japan and the United States went to war in late 1941, around 2,111 Polish Jews had found passage to various destinations, including Shanghai, 860, the United States, 532, Palestine, 186, Canada, 186, and other countries. Those who could not secure immediate onward travel found themselves transferred to the Shanghai ghetto, which, although a place of hardship, offered a refuge from the Holocaust sweeping across Europe. In all estimates, The number of Jewish lives saved by Sugihara's visas varied, with figures ranging from around 5,580 documented in official Japanese diplomatic records to as high as 10,000, according to accounts from Sugihara's family and scholars. The exact count remains elusive, but it's clear that the diplomat's efforts extended a lifeline to thousands, ensuring survival when hope seemed all but lost. Following his time in Lithuania, Sugihara was reassigned to Königsberg, eastern Prussia, where the tides of war were shifting rapidly across Europe. In March 1941, he moved to Prague, the capital of the German-occupied Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia, where the weight of Nazi oppression was palpable. Despite the grim circumstances, Sugihara continued to serve as consul general, navigating a complex political landscape while witnessing the horrors of the Holocaust unfold around him. His time in Prague would last until late 1942, where he was once again transferred, this time to Bucharest, Romania. As war raged on, Sugihara's position in Bucharest became increasingly precarious. He was promoted to Third Secretary in 1943 and received the Order of the Sacred Treasure, 5th class, in recognition of his service. But this brief moment of honour was overshadowed by the advance of the Soviet forces into Romania in 1944. The Sugihara family's situation took a dire turn when they were captured and detained by the Soviets, confined to a POW camp for 18 long months. Throughout their internment, uncertainty loomed. Survival hinged on perseverance and the hope that freedom would eventually come. In 1946, Sugihara and his family were finally released, their path home taking them the same route as refugees years earlier had taken. They left East Russia's port and made their way back to Japan, where the war-torn country was still in the throes of rebuilding. Their return was not met with celebration, however. In 1947, Sugihara was politely asked to resign from the Foreign Office as part of post-war downsizing. Although official explanations cited economic reasons, whispers of his actions in Lithuania persisted. According to some accounts, including those of his wife Yukiko, that incident of defying orders to save thousands of Jewish lives had not been forgotten. The unspoken acknowledgement of his disobedience seemed to hang over the decision, marking the end of his diplomatic career. Sugihara quietly bowed out, carrying with him the memories of those he helped save, and the cost of standing by his conscience in a world at war. After returning to Japan, Sugihara and his family settled in Fujisawa, Kanagawa Prefecture, where life took on a different pace. With his diplomatic career behind him, he faced the challenge of supporting his wife and 3 sons in a country still recovering from war. The former diplomat found himself taking up menial jobs to make ends meet, including the humble task of selling light bulbs door to door. It was a stark contrast to his days in the Foreign Service, but Sugihara accepted it without complaint, determined to provide for his family. In time, Sugihara found more stable employment, first as a general manager for an export company that operated with the US military post exchange. This position marked a small return to his professional roots, utilising his organisational skills and international experience. It was his fluency in Russian, however, that eventually led him abroad again. For the next 16 years he worked in the Soviet Union, leading a quiet life in a country where he had once defied the authorities to save countless lives. The long overdue acknowledgement came in 1991, when Munio Suzuki, then Parliamentary Vice President of Foreign Affairs, formally apologised to Sugihara's family for the years of neglect and mistreatment by Japan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This gesture was an important step towards rehabilitating Sugihara's reputation, addressing the past injustices that had marred his career. The 31st of July 1986, Sugihara died in hospital in Kamakura. Nothing was publicised on TV, nothing in the newspapers, nothing on the radio. And then a week later, his funeral. His funeral was attended by his friends and his neighbours, and Jewish people from all over the world came. The Israeli ambassador from the embassy in Tokyo came down also. After the funeral, confused friends and neighbours were asking, why are you people here attending our friend's funeral? He's not that important. He used to sell light bulbs around Fujisawa. Why are you here? And then through a series of interpreters, Sugihara's story was explained. And his friends and neighbours had no idea. No idea whatsoever. And I think that just shows you the character of the man. The man who lays behind me here.